G'day, my name's Tom Sear. I'm a PhD candidate at UNSW Canberra at the Australian Defence Force Academy. And my paper is about #Anzac, digital cloud commemoration and the centenary of the First World War. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 2015, I stood with thousands of my country people, politicians and the royal family on the most quintessentially Australian beach on the planet. It wasn't Bondi, Bells, Cottesloe or Kira. In fact, it wasn't even in Australia, but in Turkey. 25th of April 2015 marked the 100th anniversary of the dawn landing of Australian and New Zealand Army Corps or Anzac troops at a beach on the Gallipoli Peninsula, now part of modern-day Turkey. This landing was the first major engagement of Australian troops in World War I and quickly came to be seen as a key moment in the nation's history. It is commemorated annually as Anzac Day, which many Australians view as the country's most significant national day. This paper considers how digital commemoration reflects both enduring tropes in the practices surrounding Anzac Day and the beginnings of new, disruptive or creative elements within it. Following the Great War, Australia developed formal commemorative practices and civic architecture to memorialise the conflict. Urban centres across the continent developed architectural monuments which materialised trauma, loss, sacrifice and loyalty. Before dawn on April 25 every year, these sites become the focus for the performance of a collective commemorative service, comprised of ritual, language and silence. The Anzac Day dawn service connects the collective experience of local places in Australia to a specific place in Turkey to create an imagined collective community. Spatial imaginaries facilitate several dichotomous dramaturgies between the individual and the collective, the visible and the invisible, between silence and sound, and the past and the future mediated through the present moment. While 2015 marked the centenary of actual events, these practices commemorate the centenary of the First World War have also coincided with another global phenomena, the explosion of the internet, social media and personalised located devices. Today, I will argue that personalised located devices in the internet era magnify and transform that placemaking dynamic, not only in the digital, but expand it further to embrace personal space and time. Social media and the mobile phone have translated text and practices of Anzac Day to activate and amplify an ambient space for connective commemoration. Adopting Ash et al.'s, quote, geographies produced by and of the digital, I'm suggesting that within an openness to the spatial ontologies and epistemological, political, economic assemblage of the data and algorithms of geolocation, the networks of temporal and memory ambience be incorporated into the meaning of spatial presence. The era of digital commemoration has begun. The internet has created a new space for our participation in commemorative activities and new ways to tell commemorative narratives. Most Australians' experiences of Anzac Day 2015 were shaped, mediated or communicated through the digital realm. As dawn arrived in Australia on Anzac Day in 2015, the first light many Australians saw was from the screen of their digital device. On their mobile phones, they could see friends posting photos of themselves on Instagram, sleepily getting up for a local Anzac Day service. Anzac Day Ritual is composed of several elements, focused upon a sacred, spiritualised ceremony called the dawn service. It is a temporal recreation of a specific moment in the past. Services commence in the darkness before the dawn, the same time that soldiers stepped off boats on an Ottoman beach at Gallipoli. In a choreography of remembrance, while there is no strict order, the elements are identical nationally. Participants gather from around 4:30 a.m. at the local memorials, which are located in every town in Australia, or the cenotaph in major cities. Possibly a party of reservists slow marches to the memorial, guarding it with downturned rifles as they might a coffin during a funeral. A short introductory address by a returned service person league may be read. Before the first rays of sun break the horizon, the ode of remembrance is read. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. The going down of the sun, and in the morning "We will remember them." The crowd then repeats the phrase, "We will remember them." The last post is played by a lone bugler, and following a minute's silence, a reader recites the words, "Lest we forget." The assembled group repeats those words. Wreaths are laid. With the solemn service complete, the crowd disperses for refreshments, then reassembles in daylight for the Anzac Day march through civic streets. For most of the century, Anzac Day has been a collective experience in a designated public space around a memorial. These memorials started being raised in local Australian communities soon after the Great War. There are intersections in public parks all over the Australian landscape. A rough count by Ken Inglis identified almost 1,500. These became, in his view, the focus of a civil religion of Anzac commemoration. Historian of nationalism Benedict Anderson sees these forms as the presence of state-centric nationalism. For him, quote, "No more arresting emblems of modern culture of nationalism exist than cenotaphs and tombs of unknown soldiers. Deliberately empty or unknown, they epitomise the insertion and or projection of private individuals into the person or cavity, and thus the anonymous absorption of the modern self into national imaginings." Such memorials appeared in Britain in 1920. However, for Australia, the unknown soldier is a postmodern insertion. The nation did not inter one until 1993. Instead, in Australia, the national imagining is centred on a specific place, that of Gallipoli. Spectators in the darkness imagine the national genesis in a place far away, Turkey, in itself located in an imagined geography of post-colonial otherness. In his commemorative address at the national ceremony on the 25th of April 2015, the Governor-General said, "We gather here in Canberra, at a noble place here, framed by the Australian War Memorial, behind me and with our Parliament squarely beyond at the end of this magnificent Anzac Avenue. We gather in this noble place to commemorate events so far away, so long ago, the Gallipoli landings 100 years ago on this very day." Imagine for a moment the atmosphere aboard the Anzac troop ships sitting off Gallipoli Peninsula in the pre-dawn hours 100 years ago. The Anzac and their deeds at Gallipoli and throughout the First World War have, in the eyes of some, shaped our national characters. And today, so far away on Turkish soil, once the land of our enemy, now the home of our friend, thousands of our countrymen and women will gather reverently on the peninsula. They will mourn and wonder, as we do, here about the significance of the day. It should be a clear and simple answer. The spirit of Anzac lies not just in a place that you visit. The spirit of Anzac lies in us all. Those first Anzacs gave it to all of us for the rest of time, unquote. Anzac commemoration has always involved the complex interplay of the private and public, the self, social and the civil. Distinctive commemoration practices were formalised into the social technology in the late 1920s. Now commemoration occurs simultaneously in the physical world and in an interactive and immersive online public ecology, co-created by humans, algorithms and machines. Where once the choice was whether to attend the ceremony or not, now it is possible to virtually participate in multiple ceremonies at once. The mobile phone and the hashtag have become ways to create digital assembly. Where once Australians stood in silence around the cenotaph, now they can gather in a cloud of Anzac chatter, tweeting hashtag lest we forget, instead of, or as well of, speaking it out loud. Personal digital devices connected to the internet have enabled a period of intense personalisation of experience and documentation of individual memory, in combination with the creation of a vast super public online. The selfie epitomises these forces. A selfie is a self-portrait taken with a camera phone, usually at arm's length, and shared on social media. The word is an Australian invention. The etymology follows the Australian linguistic tradition of abbreviating and adding a suffix to produce words like tinny, siggy, fiery, barbie, sicky, westy, soapy. Smartphones are now embedded in contemporary life. They have quickly become connective interfaces between individual and a ubiquitous computational version of the social, performed in digital spaces like Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. They are networked digital tools that have become our prosthetic memories, storing images, text and video meticulously and effortlessly tethered to time, place and social connections. As a result, mobile devices are part of a contemporary process of mutually shaping media, place and memory. At the same time, they are locative technologies which capture and communicate complex notions of self. Self is expressed the complex presence of the self within a dynamic digital assemblage. A selfie is a statement of human agency. Equally, because selfies are created and distributed via an array of non-human agents, they are instantly located with an infrastructure of digital superpublic. Taken with mobile phones, selfies illustrate the hybrid environment between being online and offline that users now inhabit. The selfie assemblage, Hess argues, expresses 4 elements: the self, physical space, the device, and the network. The selfie simultaneously places a user into embedded social networks. Gallipoli and Anzac Day selfies exist within this dynamic. A Melbourne programmer has for several years created a Tumblr called Anzac Day Selfies. In these selfies and the related follower comments, the casual vernacular forms of online platform expression jostle, sometimes uncomfortably, with the traditions of Anzac mourning or Gallipoli commemoration. Young people wink with tongues out or declare, "Have a good day, guys." Bikini Cat Instagram stars tag "Lest we forget" with multiple emoji. Anzac selfies can be read as problematic even more clearly when extracted from the online flow and aggregated together as a way to police the austere, respectful traditions of Gallipoli commemoration with the so-called slacktivism of online media. Equally, Anzac selfies can draw social dynamism into a ritual space with other vernacular online platform practices which are part of live communication, demonstrating participation in an event or a shared social practice. Location is increasingly what selfie takers want to communicate. The geotag, as much as, if not more so than the image, has become important as the selfie has matured as a social signifier. This element transcends class status and even personal risk. Marina Laban from ESCP Europe shows that what is important in the conspicuous consumption of millionaires on Instagram is the clear geotag location of their post. Equally, as Akin Unva has shown, the soldiers' war selfies across the contemporary Levant explicitly use the geotag to position themselves authentically on the front line as the most important signifier in Infowar selfies. It is worth noting that the hashtags at the bottom of these posts, Anzac is itself a product of media materialism, emerging from a First World War Cairo administrative office to make the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps more telegram-friendly. Hashtag Lest We Forget has come to serve as shorthand in contemporary social media. This phrase derives from a prophetic hymn written by Kipling for Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897. Now its trepidation and foreboding for the loss of empire has been translocated into social media to symbolise all forms of memory and activation. The hashtag itself located in a Twitter column of reference, a form of verticality so often associated with commemorative architectural forms. The expression of "lest we forget," however well-meaning, can also become indicative of missteps via misspellings, which inadvertently reveal misunderstandings and traces reproduced out of context. Often in the service, the communal utterance of the phrase "lest we forget" precedes the last post and the minute's silence. On November 11, 1919, the British Empire stopped to stand in silence on Remembrance Day for the first time. Two men usually share the credit for proposing the 2-minute silence: South African author and politician Sir Percy Fitzpatrick and Australian soldier and journalist Edward Honey. In May 1919, Honey wrote a letter to the London Evening News pleading for, quote, 5 minutes of silence, of national remembrance in the home, in the street, anywhere indeed where men and women chance to be. Fitzpatrick and Honey undoubtedly hoped this tradition would still be observed nearly a century later. It's unlikely they could have anticipated that it could be commemorated in clicks, likes, shares and tweets which connect the home, the street, anywhere in utterly new ways. New industrial technologies from tanks to poison gas radically changed the scale, speed and global impact of warfare between 1914 and 18. Afterwards, what psychologist Stephen Brown calls social technologies emerged to cope with the trauma. The seemingly timeless commemorative practices of silence, poppies and poetic odes were invented and globally accepted between 1919 and 22. These assemblages of technologies are mediational means for the reflexive self-modification of subjectivity. That is, technology as a concretisation of social relations, which through use enables change. Steigler suggests that technology as organised inorganic matter is a form of human memory. From these perspectives, objects like war memorials are a form of this memory technology, focusing, holding, and stimulating the memories of groups and individuals. Indeed, the assemblage of rituals with the architecture of memorialisation and placemaking, which enables change, depending on how social technology functions into the assemblage of its insertion. Now, contemporary communication technologies are beginning to play a similar infrastructure role. For both past and present conflicts, as Brown suggests, in such highly technologically mediated versions, the silence disposes of those who are being commemorated and makes the silence a spectacle where participants are absorbed within their own experience, leading to continuity and personalisation. These social technologies have all proved easily adaptable to social media in an era of planetary scale computation. 2 minutes of silence can be downloaded to a mobile phone or experienced on YouTube. Silence enables speech, paradoxically emphasising the importance of the present moment for the future in its reference to the past. These processes of de- and re-tutorialisation, which are both part of globalisation and the functions of immediacy and participation of bodily affect and sensorial unconscious impacts virally transmitted. Countless fellow commemorators on Gallipoli in 2015 shared their experiences on Facebook, either live or upon their return to Istanbul. Commemoration in the digital involves investment of micro-temporality. As Margette et al. Argue, visibility like selfies and social information, the real-time participation of others, like the use of the hashtag lest we forget, encourage micro-donations of time and effort for commemoration, which expands and accelerates the efforts of those involved in formal old-school commemorative activities, enabling what they describe as the individualisation of collective action. This is an accelerated expansion of the public sphere of traditional commemoration in a new public space. Whereas the minute's silence made visible, but importantly inaudible, those who are engaged in commemoration in civil society, social media now makes noisy many of those who take part in the process and gathers them via ciphers into new kinds of collective experiences. Drawing upon Amor and Stengers, the algorithms which support these acts, quote, confer the power to speak their name. Such processes of the ineffable bring us to the cloud. As Amor argues, cloud computing functions upon the thresholds of perception itself, where the apparently abstract and obscure world can be brought into vision and rendered intelligible, unquote. This is precisely how the social technologies of commemoration invented and promulgated after the First World War functioned, and what makes them so amenable to digital transformation. The symbolic town centre in Australia, with its imagined reference for individuals in a collective place to a place in Turkey, has been part of Australian society for 100 years. Since 2015, social media and both social media and local sites in Australia make visible these connections. To conclude, the digital has dramatically changed the commemoration of Anzac Day. In addition to silent contemplation and collective intonement in the darkness of hymns, there is individual utterances of phrases on Twitter, instead of collective civic projection onto empty tombs and unknown soldiers in anonymous democratic fusion. There is the centrality of the gaze upon commemorators themselves. Instead of the fusion of the local and the national and the international in solemn darkness, there are sunny selfies. Instead of a moment's reflection on impermanence, loss and decay, there is cloud storage of that moment for a future archive. Anzac Day could always have been called a photological liturgy, concerned as it is with the eternal flame of remembrance burning within the darkness of death. In its centenary, through the optic fibre of digital communications, light itself has transmitted the Anzac Code, illuminating the new power of networks and relationships in the next century of connective commemoration. Light is no longer metaphorical, but infrastructure itself. The Australian way of war was developed at Gallipoli. It involves the projection of power from a small, highly geographically isolated nation into and onto the world map. Anzac Day ritually sheds light on this beach. Just as Bratton suggests the state looks more like the stack and the stack more like a state, where Westphalian sovereignty is invested within the internet, digital commemoration projects that power into the era of planetary scale computation.